She texted after a year away. I've had my fun. Now I'm ready to be a wife again. Then went pale when she saw who opened my door. So I'm standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, trying to process the fact that my wife of 26 years just vanished like she was never here. And the only thing she left behind was a sticky note on the bathroom mirror that said, I need to find myself. Don't wait up. With a smiley face drawn at the end like this was some kind of joke. Yvonne's closet was empty, her toiletries gone, and when I checked our joint accounts because something felt extremely wrong, $80,000 had been transferred out 3 days earlier to an account I'd never seen before. I stood there refreshing the bank app like the numbers might magically reappear, but they didn't. And that's when the panic set in because this wasn't a weekend trip or a girl's vacation. This was something else entirely. I'm Russell Lawson, 50 years old, and I'd spent the last 2 decades building a small chain of car washes in the suburbs. Steady, reliable work that gave us a comfortable life. And I thought we had a stable marriage even if it wasn't exactly passionate anymore. I called her cell probably 40 times that first day, left voicemails that went from concerned to confused to angry to just desperate. But every single call went straight to voicemail. And by the second day, I realized her phone wasn't just off. It was disconnected completely. I drove to her office downtown, walked past security like I belonged there. And when I found her supervisor, she gave me this awkward look and said she requested an indefinite leave of absence about a week ago. Said it was personal. And it hit me that Yvonne had planned this. She'd orchestrated her entire disappearance, and I was apparently the last person to know. Our kids, Owen, who's 27 and works in finance, and Piper, who's 25 and teaches elementary school, both refused to look me in the eye when I called them. And when I pressed Owen about whether he knew anything, he snapped at me with, just give mom some space. You're making this worse. And that's when it dawned on me my own children were in on this. They knew she was leaving and nobody thought to give me a heads up. The house felt like a tomb after that. Every room echoing with memories of a life I thought we'd built together. Photos on the walls showing vacations and birthdays and anniversaries that suddenly seemed like lies. And I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just wandered room to room, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. I took a week off work, left my assistant manager in charge of the car washes, told him I had a family emergency, which wasn't technically a lie, and spent most of that time sitting on the couch staring at nothing while my brain tried to piece together the previous months for signs I'd missed. Had she been unhappy? Was there someone else? Did I work too much? Was I a bad husband? The questions just looped endlessly with no answers. And the worst part was the silence, because at least if she'd yelled at me or told me she hated me, I'd have something to work with. But this vanishing act left me with absolutely nothing. My business partners called to check on me, concerned because I'd always been the reliable one, the guy who showed up early and stayed late. And I had to tell them I didn't know when I'd be back to normal, because honestly, I didn't know if there was a normal to get back to. It was around week 3 when I first noticed my new neighbor, this woman named Thea Kimball, who'd moved in 2 doors down about a month before all this happened. And I'd seen her a few times coming home from night shifts at the hospital still in her scrubs looking exhausted. We'd exchanged polite waves, the kind of neighbor interactions that don't mean anything. But one afternoon she knocked on my door, holding a plate of chocolate chip cookies that were slightly burned around the edges, and she said, I made too many. Thought you might want some. With this genuine smile that was the first real human warmth I'd felt in weeks. I invited her in mostly because I didn't want to be rude, and we ended up talking for 2 hours about nothing important. Just normal conversation about the neighborhood and the weather and her job in the ICU. And when she left, it struck me that I'd laughed for the first time since Yvonne disappeared. Thea started checking in on me after that. Nothing pushy or romantic. Just friendly visits that broke up the crushing loneliness. And she had this way of listening that made me feel like I wasn't losing my mind over being hurt and confused. She'd bring coffee sometimes, or we'd sit on my porch and she'd tell me stories about difficult patients and hospital politics, and slowly I started to feel like maybe I could survive this. One evening about a month after Yvonne left, Thea and I were sitting on my back deck with beers watching the sunset, and I'd been telling her the whole story, the disappearance and the money and the kids siding with their mother, and she got quiet for a minute before saying, I need to tell you something. And my stomach dropped because I thought here comes another betrayal. She looked down at her hands and said, I was your brother's hospice nurse 3 years ago. I took care of Marcus in his final weeks, and I just stared at her because my brother had died of cancer and I'd been with him as much as possible, but there were so many nurses I didn't remember all their faces. Thea continued, he talked about you constantly, showed me photos, told me stories about your life and your car wash business. And when I saw you moving into this neighborhood, I recognized you immediately. And I didn't know what to say because this felt too coincidental, too convenient. And she must have seen it on my face because she quickly added, I didn't approach you because it felt weird, like I was some kind of stalker. And then when I saw you were struggling, I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know you. And there was something in her eyes, this vulnerability and honesty that I desperately needed to believe in. I asked her why she was telling me now, and she said, because I don't want to start something real with a lie between us. And that word, real, hung in the air like a promise of something I didn't even know I wanted anymore. That night after she left, I sat in my empty house, Yvonne's absence like a physical presence in every room. And I understood for the first time since the sticky note, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what might be possible. And that terrified me almost as much as it gave me hope. The next few months were like watching myself come back to life in slow motion. And honestly, I didn't even realize it was happening until I caught myself humming while making breakfast one morning and had to stop because it felt wrong to be happy when Yvonne had just abandoned me. Work started going better because I could actually focus again. I opened a fourth location, and my business partners commented that I seemed sharper in meetings, more engaged than I'd been in years. And I threw myself into a bunch of home improvement projects I'd been putting off forever, tearing out the old deck and building a new one, repainting the garage, fixing the fence that had been leaning since last winter. Thea would come over on Wednesday evenings like clockwork. We'd have coffee and talk about our days. And on weekends, we started doing normal friend stuff like hitting up the farmer's market or catching a movie. Nothing that felt like dating, but something comfortable and easy in a way my marriage never was. She never pushed for more or asked intrusive questions about Yvonne. And looking back, that patience was exactly what I needed because I was still processing 26 years of apparently living a lie. It was a Saturday in late spring, about 5 months after Yvonne left, when things shifted between us. We'd spent the afternoon planting tomatoes and peppers in my backyard garden, and afterward we were sitting on the porch drinking beer with dirt still under our fingernails, and she told me about her divorce 5 years earlier, how her ex-husband had cheated with someone from his gym, and how she'd spent 2 years thinking she'd never trust anyone again. I opened up about how hollow my marriage had felt toward the end, how Yvonne and I had basically been roommates for the last decade, going through motions and having the same boring conversations about bills and schedules, but never really connecting about anything that mattered. Thea reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "You deserved better than that." And something in my chest cracked open because nobody had said that to me, not my kids, not my friends. Nobody had validated that I had a right to feel betrayed and hurt. We kissed that night for the first time, soft and tentative like teenagers. And when she pulled back, she had tears in her eyes and whispered, "I wasn't looking for this." And I said, "Me neither." But it seemed right in a way nothing had in years. We started actually dating after that, real dates where I'd pick her up even though she lived 2 doors down, and we'd go to nice restaurants or drive out to the coast for the day, and I felt like I was discovering what it meant to be with someone who actually wanted to be with me. She'd leave little notes in my truck, stupid things like, "Hope your meeting goes well," with smiley faces, and she'd text me random thoughts during her shifts. And it was all so simple and genuine that I couldn't believe I'd spent decades with someone who never did any of that. My kids noticed, obviously. Owen called one day around the 7-month mark and said, "So I heard you're seeing someone," in this accusatory tone, and I asked him how he'd heard that, and he went silent before admitting, "Mom's been keeping tabs on you," which was rich considering Yvonne had been gone for 7 months without a single word directly to me. I told Owen that what I did with my life was no longer any of his mother's business, and he got defensive, said I was being cruel and moving on too fast, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming that his mother had moved on before she even left. Piper was slightly better about it when she called a few days later. She at least asked if I was happy, but even she had this edge in her voice like I was somehow betraying the family by not sitting around waiting for a woman who'd stolen our savings and ghosted her entire life. The real bomb dropped on a Tuesday evening in early September, almost 9 months after Yvonne left. Thea and I were making dinner together in my kitchen. She was chopping vegetables while I worked on the grill outside, and she got really quiet before calling me back inside. She was standing there holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines, her hands shaking, and she said, "I'm so sorry. I know this is complicated. I know we've only been together a few months." And I just pulled her into a hug, because complicated or not, this felt like the universe giving me a second chance at something I'd completely screwed up the first time around. My kids had been accidents that I loved, but never really appreciated the way I should have. I'd been too young and too focused on building the business. But now at 50, I was financially stable and emotionally present and genuinely excited in a way I don't think I was even capable of back then. We spent the next few months planning. Thea gradually moved more of her stuff into my place because it was bigger and had a yard, and I started converting my home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling a crib while imagining what it would be like to raise a child with someone who actually wanted to build a life with me. I told my business partners about the pregnancy, and they were genuinely happy for me, said they'd noticed how much lighter I seemed lately. And it hit me I'd been carrying around this weight of an unhappy marriage for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to just breathe. Thea was about 4 months along when everything exploded. Her baby bump was just starting to show, and we'd started talking about whether to get married before the baby came or wait until after. And life felt almost surreally perfect in a way that should have warned me something was about to go wrong. My phone buzzed at 11 on a Thursday night with a text from Yvonne's number that I hadn't seen active in almost a year. The message said, "I've had my fun. Now I'm ready to be a wife again." And I stared at it like it was written in a foreign language because the audacity of that sentence was genuinely incomprehensible. More texts came rapid fire after that. "I made a mistake, and the kids want us back together. And this is all up to you now. And I'm coming home tomorrow." Like she was announcing a casual visit and not attempting to walk back into a life she'd blown up nearly 12 months ago. I showed Thea the messages, and she went pale, asked what I was going to do, and I told her I was calling my lawyer first thing in the morning because whatever Yvonne thought was going to happen, she was dead wrong. My lawyer, this sharp woman named Barbara who'd handled my brother's estate and some business contracts, met with me the next morning and looked over everything. The bank records showing the $80,000 withdrawal, the timeline of Yvonne's disappearance, the complete lack of communication for almost a year. Barbara leaned back in her chair and said, "Russell, you have an incredibly strong position here. Abandonment, theft, emotional distress, the works." And I felt this surge of validation because I'd spent so many months wondering if I was overreacting. I hired a private investigator too, a former cop named Tom who came recommended by Barbara, because something told me there was more to this story than just Yvonne finding herself on some extended soul-searching journey. Tom came back 3 days later with a folder that made my stomach turn, photos of Yvonne with different men over the past year, credit card receipts from hotels and restaurants in 3 different states, evidence that she'd been planning this escape for at least 6 months before she actually left based on her search history and communications her phone company had archived. She hadn't been finding herself. She'd been having an extended affair tour on our dime. And when the money ran out and her latest boyfriend in Miami dumped her, suddenly she remembered she had a stable husband with a successful business waiting at home. I sat in my living room going through the investigator's report while Thea was at work, looking at photos of my wife of 26 years laughing with strange men, kissing someone in a beach parking lot, walking hand in hand through some downtown I didn't recognize. And the weird thing was I didn't feel angry, just empty, like I was looking at a stranger who happened to have Yvonne's face. I was still sitting there with the folder open when someone started pounding on my door early Saturday morning, aggressive knocking like the person was trying to break it down, and I knew without looking who it was. I didn't move, just sat there listening to Yvonne yell, "Russ, I know you're in there. We need to talk. You can't ignore me forever." And her voice had this edge of panic that I'd never heard before. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs and Thea appeared wearing my old college t-shirt that hung down to her knees, her baby bump clearly visible now at 4 months. And she looked at me with these calm, steady eyes and said, "Want me to answer it?" And I nodded because I genuinely wanted to see Yvonne's face when she realized how thoroughly she'd destroyed any chance of coming back. Thea walked to the door with this calm confidence that I absolutely did not feel, unlocked it, and pulled it open while I stood behind her where Yvonne could see me clearly. And the look on my wife's face was worth every sleepless night I'd had over the past year. She froze mid-sentence, her mouth literally hanging open, eyes darting from Thea to me to Thea's visible baby bump and back again. And the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might actually pass out on my porch. Yvonne stammered, "Who are you? What is this? What's going on?" And Thea just smiled politely and said, "I'm his girlfriend, and you need to leave," before closing the door in her face. And we could hear Yvonne screaming from outside, "You got someone pregnant? Are you insane? We're still married. I'm calling my lawyer." But her voice sounded panicked and desperate rather than angry, like she'd just realized she'd miscalculated badly. I filed for divorce that afternoon. Barbara drew up papers citing abandonment and theft and marital misconduct, and we had everything documented with bank statements, and the investigator's report, and even testimony from Yvonne's former supervisor about the sudden leave of absence and the fact that Yvonne had never intended to return to her job. Yvonne tried everything to stop it. She called me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to manipulative to outright threatening. She showed up at my house twice more until I got a temporary restraining order, and she even tried to turn the kids against me harder than they already were by painting herself as the victim of my cruelty. Owen came over with his wife Melissa one evening about 2 weeks later, barged in without knocking, which was his first mistake, and immediately started yelling, "How could you do this to Mom? How could you humiliate her like this? She came back and you embarrassed her with some pregnant side piece." And that's when I lost it. I told him to sit down and shut up, which shocked him because I'd never spoken to him like that in his entire life, and I laid out everything. The $80,000 stolen from our joint accounts, the year of complete abandonment, the multiple affairs Yvonne had while she was supposedly finding herself, all of it backed up with documentation I'd kept in a folder specifically for this conversation. Owen's face went red and he tried to argue. She was confused. She made mistakes. You're supposed to forgive. That's what marriage means. And I asked him point blank if he and Piper had been sending their mother money while she was gone, and the way he wouldn't meet my eyes told me everything. Melissa, who'd been quiet this whole time standing by the door with her arms crossed, suddenly said, "Wait, you sent her money. You told me that money was for your student loans." And Owen tried to backtrack, but she wasn't having it. She grabbed her purse and walked out, and Owen followed her, still trying to explain, and I haven't heard from him since except through lawyers when the divorce proceedings started getting serious. Piper was different though. She came over alone a week later and just sat on my couch crying. And she told me something that honestly broke whatever tiny piece of my heart still cared about Yvonne. She said, "Dad, Mom used to laugh about you when we'd talk on the phone. She'd say things like, 'Stability looks real good when you're broke and used up.' And she told us she was coming back because her boyfriend in Miami dumped her and she'd run through most of the money you two had saved. And hearing that Yvonne had been openly mocking me to our children while planning her big return was somehow worse than the cheating or the theft. It was the deliberate cruelty of it that cut deep." Piper apologized for taking her mother's side, said she'd been manipulated and guilt-tripped into believing I was the problem, that Yvonne had painted this whole picture of me as an emotionally distant workaholic who drove her away, and she asked if she could be part of the baby's life because she wanted to do better this time, wanted to be the kind of sister and daughter who showed up for people. The court date was brutal in the way I needed it to be. Yvonne showed up with a lawyer who clearly hadn't been briefed on how bad her case actually was, and they tried to argue that I'd abandoned her emotionally for years, and that's why she left, that the money she took was rightfully hers as a spouse, that I'd moved on inappropriately fast with Thea. Barbara destroyed that argument in about 5 minutes, presented the timeline of Yvonne's affair planning that went back almost 2 years based on what the investigator had found, the financial theft that occurred before she left, the year-long abandonment with zero contact, and the judge, this no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Hale, just stared at Yvonne and said, "Ma'am, you have no grounds here whatsoever. You will receive 15% of marital assets minus the $80,000 you unlawfully withdrew. This case is closed." And I watched Yvonne's lawyer physically wince because he knew they'd just gotten destroyed. Yvonne tried to get alimony, tried to claim she deserved half of everything including my business. But Barbara had documented that she'd been employed and capable the entire time and had left voluntarily, and Judge Hale wasn't having any of it. She actually said from the bench, "You don't get to abandon your marriage for a year, steal marital funds, and then come back demanding support when your plans didn't work out," which felt like the validation I'd been needing for months. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying around this massive weight, and someone had finally cut it loose. And Thea was waiting for me outside with Piper, and seeing them together, my daughter and the woman who'd saved me without even trying. That's when I finally believed this new life was real. I updated my will immediately after the divorce finalized, left everything to Thea and the baby with a trust fund set up for Piper because she'd chosen to see the truth and rebuild our relationship. And Owen got nothing because, as Barbara said, "You're under no obligation to reward betrayal just because someone shares your DNA." Emma Grace was born on a cold morning in February, tiny and perfect with Thea's eyes and dark hair, and apparently my stubbornness, according to the nurses. And holding her, I felt something I'd never experienced with Owen or Piper. This pure, uncomplicated joy that wasn't mixed with resentment or obligation or fear. Thea was an incredible mother right from the start. patient and calm even when Emma screamed for hours with colic. And watching her sing lullabies at 3 in the morning while I made bottles, I understood this was what partnership actually looked like. Two people choosing each other every day and working together instead of just existing in the same house. We got married when Emma was 3 months old. Small ceremony in my backyard with Piper as Thea's maid of honor and my business partners and some friends from the neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but more genuine than my wedding to Yvonne ever was. And when I said my vows, I meant every single word. We ran into Yvonne exactly once, at a grocery store about 6 months after Emma was born, and she looked rough, tired and older than her 50 years, pushing a cart with budget brands and generic products. She saw us, saw Emma in the carrier strapped to my chest, and something crumbled in her expression, the realization of everything she'd thrown away landing on her all at once. And she walked over slowly and said, "Congratulations, she's beautiful," in this small, defeated voice. I just said, "Thanks, take care of yourself," because I genuinely didn't feel anger anymore, just pity for someone who destroyed her own life chasing a fantasy that never existed. And we walked away, and I didn't look back. Piper told me later that Yvonne was working 2 jobs trying to recover financially, that she'd moved into a studio apartment across town, that she talked sometimes about how she'd ruined everything. And honestly, I hope she finds peace someday, but it's not my problem anymore. Owen reached out through Piper recently, said he wanted to meet Emma, wanted to apologize for how he'd acted, but I'm not there yet, and maybe I never will be, and Thea supports whatever I decide because she trusts me to know what's healthy for our family and doesn't push me to forgive before I'm ready. Emma just turned 1 last month. We had a small party in the backyard with Piper and Thea's family and some friends from the neighborhood. And watching Emma smash cake all over her face while everyone laughed, I had this moment of clarity that if Yvonne hadn't left, if she hadn't blown up our life, I would have died never knowing what it was like to be genuinely loved by someone who chose me every single day. I'm not grateful for the pain or the betrayal or the months of hell where I couldn't sleep or eat or function like a normal human being, but I'm grateful for where it led me. And sometimes when Thea and I are sitting on the porch after Emma's asleep, drinking wine and talking about nothing important, I think about that sticky note on the mirror and realize it was probably the best thing Yvonne ever did for me because it set me free to find the life I was actually supposed to live with a woman who sees me and values me and a daughter I get to raise the right way this time around. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.